The University of Michigan's Consumer Sentiment Index falling sharply in February amid a jump in inflation expectations, the biggest jump that we've seen since 2021. Joining us now, we want to bring in Joanne Shu. She's University of Michigan's Director of Surveys of Consumers. Joanne, it's great to have you here on Yahoo Finance. Talk to me about this massive uptick that we're seeing in inflation expectations and what this signals just in terms of what the months and years ahead could potentially look like.
What we're seeing is a very broad-based conclusion or opinion among consumers that inflation is going to pick up in the year ahead as well as the next 5 years. It was a pretty large month-over-month increase for both short and long-run expectations. It's not necessarily cause for panic at this moment, but these expectations are clearly being driven by concerns over policy, concerns that tariffs are going to lead to price hikes. And it's very anticipatory on the basis of consumers.
How is that playing out across political orientations? We saw after the results of the election a direct flip where Democrats' inflation expectations rose, Republican inflation expectations moved in the opposite direction, indicating similar sentiment to the election results going in either party's direction. What is that sentiment telling you?
Partisan differences in sentiment and in views of the economy are longstanding. So what we saw following the election was exactly what we expected. And that's one of the reasons why it is absolutely critical to look at independents. So independents don't really have a break around the election, and they're usually generally right around the national average. And critically, what we saw this month was that independents had a decline in sentiment as well as Democrats. And they also saw the big hikes in inflation expectations. So the changes that we saw this month relative to January, they're not just being driven by Democrats. We see it critically among independents.
Joanne, is this a trend just from who you have spoken to and obviously comparing it back to prior readings? Is this a trend that you expect to continue?
The trend, if you're talking about the fact that people tend to have higher levels of sentiment when their party is in power in the White House, yes, we do expect that to continue. It's been that case at least since the Reagan administration.
Joanne, more so the inflation expectations and just given the uncertainty out of Washington and kind of the whipsaw action that we've seen headline-driven wise. How is that potentially, do you see that being factored in here as we look to the future?
Sure. So the last time we saw such a large increase in inflation expectations, long-run inflation expectations, was in 2008. But times were very different at that time. Inflation expectations then were really reacting to oil price shocks that hit all-time historic highs in June. And then they waned right after that. They plummeted right after that, and so did inflation expectations. This time it's completely different. People are not reacting to current price shocks. They're reacting to anticipated price shocks. And so it really remains to be seen if these inflation expectations will stick. It really depends on what kind of tariff policies are rolled out and whether or not that trickles down to consumer prices.
Joanne, obviously you can give us great insight into this survey, but you're also an economist in your own right. So I wonder if you can put this survey into context for us. How does something like consumer sentiment, inflation expectations impact the real world economy, especially in the context of the last few years where inflation expectations have been rising, like you said, but consumers have continued to be relentless in their spending regardless?
I think what we should know when we look at consumer spending is that consumers have been supported by strong incomes over the last few years, in spite of all the other things that are weighing down their views of the economy. And the other thing is that sentiment hit an all-time low in June of 2022. And since then, it was more or less on an upward trajectory. And that's consistent with the strong spending that we were seeing. People were seeing that inflation was slowing. They weren't feeling great about the economy, but they were feeling better about it than they were in June. Right now, we're in a situation where sentiment is starting to decline and consumer expectations over the economy are deteriorating on a number of dimensions. So the upward trend that we had been seeing between 2022 and 2024, it's not looking right now like it's necessarily going to continue. But again, it's been 2 months of declines. It's really too soon to tell if this decline is going to be persistent to the long term or not.
All right, Joanne Shu, great to get your insight. Thanks so much for joining us here today.